Hello, lovely artists. Mrs. Cloet here in the Great Big Art Room. Today we are creating a little tutorial to introduce our Enchanted Environment project. This really is a great project that combines watercolor skills at the end with our skills in the technique and the technical aspects of creating perspective drawings or things that are following the rules of perspective. What I love about this project is that it's incredibly open-ended. You can make it as creative and quirky as possible. You can incorporate your own style into this kind of every which way. But there's also a neat balance in that it really is technical. This practice page that we're going to do together really teaches you the rules of creating the grid that will create an environment or a setup for you to follow the rules of perspective without having to worry too much. This creation of a grid, there's kind of an example here that we're going to end up creating in our practice square. If you can get this grid exact, and we're going to walk you through that to use your ruler and create those measurements to make it perfect. Once your grid is perfect, then you can have all the fun in the world and add all sorts of creative elements to it, but it'll still be following the rules of perspective. So if you remember in class, we talked about perspective when it came to cubes and buildings and boxes. There's a horizon line and the vanishing points. And we know that in real life, when something is going off in the distance three-dimensionally, it's always going to become smaller, and it actually follows the rules of perspective. So this is a project that incorporates that practice. This is the page that we're going to work on. If you don't have a printer, it's no big deal. You just need a blank piece of paper. Any scrap piece of paper is fine. And you're going to create a 5-inch square. So again, you don't need to print this out. You just need a scrap of paper, and you're going to create a 5-inch square. So if I use my ruler, you are going to need a ruler, of course. Then I can see here that the top and the bottom are 5 inches, and the sides again are also exactly 5 inches. So just create a 5 by 5 inch square, remembering on a ruler that one side is going to be inches, and then the other side is going to be centimeters, and you should be able to see the cm for centimeters and the inch for inches. We're going to use inches actually for this kind of project. So you can pause the video and create a 5 by 5 square, or you can print this handout out, totally up to you. I actually think I created this printout this handout in our art kits for you. However, if you make a mistake and you just want to start over again, you're more than welcome to just create a 5 by 5 inch square. So before we get started, I want to show you some examples of what students have done in the past. So I'm going to show you a couple basic ones. This one I love because it's really still includes a lot of the grid. It's incomplete. It hasn't been painted. It's just kind of most of the way through the project, but I like keeping this one because it shows you kind of the breakdown. So this student actually used 1/2 inch measurements. We're going to use 1 inch measurements. You could do either, but you can see the grid that the student has created on both sides, and it creates these diamonds, these very small diamonds. But when you add diamonds together, they become these openings. And here, when you look at an opening, you can see the perspective, right? You can see the three-dimensional piece. This student did include a little bit of shading where you can see that the light source is coming here, so that the interior walls on this side are a little lighter. The interior walls on this side are a little darker, so we know that our light source is coming in here. When you look through the instructions, and you'll read the instructions in the big slideshow that I posted, but you're wanting to create at least 7 different openings that are different sizes. So you may have an opening that's really large, and so you actually see a lot of floor space and a short wall. This student actually created walls that are all pretty consistent. This one might be a little bit deeper, but they're all pretty consistent. Then I can move on to an example like this that is a bit more in depth, actually significantly more in depth. And you can see here that the student has chosen a very obvious theme. Having a theme is also a requirement. So you can see that this is very much a forest or an outside nature theme. So they've got kind of pond areas, trees, lots of different nature pieces, and they've started to do the painting inclusion. What I also like is that this person's kind of reversed the idea a little bit, where these interior spaces are kind of the hallways between these raised islands. It's exactly the same way the student created the grid, followed along, but that's their creativity, where they wanted things kind of buildings almost, or islands that are elevated, and these sunken down kind of hallways or in between spaces between each area. So also a cool concept. Then there's this one that I like to show because it's very, very symmetrical. So they kind of have everything even. This is kind of a Pokemon looks like theme, which is cool. A really nice start to playing with watercolor and layers, but still a definite inclusion. You can see that they've used the grid lines, of course, but they've done a pretty great job of erasing some of those grid lines. And they've really elevated their work by incorporating some steps and some windows and doors. Definitely some shading as well. So you can see how very, very different this project looks from this project. However, the steps are actually exactly the same. And so this is where I love to see students' various creativity pieces here. So this looks like a platform, more of a large scale as opposed to small little environments, a snapshot into one large environment. Okay, a couple more. Got this one here that the student did some lovely play in layering with watercolor. You can see it's kind of a seasonal theme. So there's some summer, some spring, some fall and winter. So they've done some seasonal stuff, some here, some fall leaves. And you can see that they've still got the same perspective, same grid style. And then finally, here's an elaborate one, highly creative. Okay, so same thing, all the exact same parallel lines, right? Everything is following the grid that we're going to create on this practice page together. But here, this student has really elevated their creative level. So now they're looking at creating curvatures and arches and three-dimensional creatures that are floating kind of above the environment. You can see the sunken areas. They've got some characters here, this over-the-top or kind of above the scene bridge looks like. Some really cool fine details, right? And very much a noticeable, recognizable theme. Super cool. All right, so let's get to this spot. Again, you can print this out or you can just create a 5 by 5 inch grid, or sorry, 5 by 5 inch square on a scrap piece of paper. So all your kind of step-by-steps are along the top, but we're gonna do this together. Get yourself an eraser, of course, and a pencil and a ruler, maybe a sharpener. That's pretty much all you need. So our first step says here, using a ruler, mark the left and right sides with an 1/2 inch increment. So I'm going to move my ruler so I've got my inch side. I'm going to line it up with the top, and I'm just going to mark 1/2 inches. So the very top corner is my first one. There's my 1/2 inch, then the 1, then the 1/2, then the 2, 1/2, and 3, 1/2, and 4, 1/2, and 5. And of course, I'm going to be doing this live, so it's going to take some time, but you're more than welcome, of course, to always pause and catch up and go as fast as slow as you like. So again, my first is the corner, then I've got my 1/2, my 1 inch, my 1/2, my 2, my 1/2, 3, 1/2, 4, 1/2, and the final corner. What I also like to record videos that aren't sped up, just so you can see how much time it does take. It does take a lot of time, or it can take time to do this right. I mentioned this before, but we're going to really spend time practicing getting this grid just right. You can imagine this is a 5 by 5 inch square. We're going to end up doing our good copy on a 12 by 12 inch watercolor paper. So we're marking 1/2 inches here on your good copy when it's a 12 by 12 square, which is this size, right? The size of this guy. You're going to end up marking 1 inch increments, but either way, you're creating the same exact style of grid. So this you can see as my example over here. Okay, I've got smaller grids because it's a smaller square. And you can see that there's a diagonal created, and you're creating this diamond shape. I gave you one as an example. So this is most definitely not a square. If it was a perfect square, it would end up being a bird's eye view directly above. But we don't want that. We actually want the angle so that you can create those kind of side walls in a three-dimensional looking space. So you can decide how kind of squished or squashed your diamond is based on the angle or the slant of the line. So I really like going from the top corner to my third measurement. So my first measurement's my corner 1. Actually, I might do 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I think I'm liking that. So I'm going to go from my top corner to my 4th measurement. 3rd would also work. 5th would also work. It's just creates a different kind of angle or squish to your diamond. So the big piece here for perspective, as you remember just learning the basics of perspective in class, is that all of your lines that are going the same direction must be parallel. If they are not parallel, or even if they're a little off, that can be a real deal breaker for your final piece looking realistic or looking like it makes sense. So having things a little off can really end up being big problems for you later, which is why I'm wanting to do this kind of follow along tutorial. So you can see I'm just continuing down, following that same angle, copying marker to marker or measurement to measurement line all the way down. I am taking my time because it is critical for the success of this perspective piece that I do make those lines exactly parallel. So you can see I've now gone from my left side to my very bottom corner, but I've got some more measurements to go. So you have a couple of options. One option is to eyeball it, but that does take some real skill. Another option is to create your 1 inch measurements, or sorry, your 1/2 inch measurements along the bottom as well. So I'm gonna do that corner, 1/2, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5. There we go. There we go. So now I can see where that crosses the line will be my perfect parallel. Actually, I'm gonna go a little lower. I really want to be fussy at this stage in the game. Sometimes perspective feels intimidating, and I think that's why creating this practice page, we can kind of figure this out together in practice before we jump onto our good copy. You remember me from class even talking about the graphite transfer, how much I really love and care about making that good copy your very best work. Okay, then I'm going to move up here and do the same thing. So I'm going to make my measurements, but if you'd rather eyeball, if you can eyeball perfection, go for it, but that can be challenging at times. Let's scoot up a little bit more. There we go. So here's my 1/2, my 1/2, 1/2, there's 3.5, 4. There we go. So I'm actually going to spin my page around because I like to see, instead of covering the lines with my ruler, I like to be able to see the lines with my ruler, or have my ruler not block my vision. That looks close. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing. So I've got all these parallel lines. I'm double checking that they're parallel. I can actually see that one's a little off, so I'm going to fix it because anything that's going to be a little off is going to be a pain later. So let me just fix this one up. You know what? I'm going to do 2 of them. This is me being really fussy, but I like being fussy. There. Okay. So now I'm going to do the opposite. So if you remember, you can actually count. I went from the top corner to my 1, 2, 3, 4th marker. I'm going to do the same thing, but on the other side. So I'm going to go from my corner to my 1, 2, 3, 4th marker. I'm going to line it up to be exact. Sometimes a mechanical pencil can help because you're not worrying about kind of the width or the thickness of your lead. Rarely do I say you should use a mechanical pencil because for shading we know that they are a disaster. But for technical stuff like this, a mechanical pencil can be helpful for sure. So as I'm going, I'm definitely going from my marker to my marker, but I'm also taking a second to just check that my lines look parallel, check that I didn't have a measurement that was a little off. What you'll also notice as we work away through this process is that your lines will have these crisscross spots, right where these two lines cross. And we'll end up using those shortly. Oops. You'll notice too that I'm working on a glass table, but I actually found this kind of thin cardboard booklet that I really like, and so I placed that underneath, as I find working on a really hard surface like glass can be frustrating with pencil work, and extra frustrating when you're wanting to erase stuff because it kind of creates the grooves, or you kind of end up carving out your paper. That's not quite right. There we go. Okay, and then I like to spin mine around, but you can do whatever you like. I just like to not cover up the lines that I'm trying to make parallel with my ruler. There we go. Now there's the last one I don't love, but I think it's going to be totally doable. Okay, so here we go. I've created a grid. I've got these diamonds. My next step is actually to create some verticals along the spots where the X's are created, or where the two lines converge. So I want to see if I'm pretty darn close to vertical. These we've realized over the years that if they're not 100% parallel, it's not a total deal breaker, but they're pretty darn close, or one of them might be a little shifted off, and that's okay. So again, now I'm creating vertical lines where these meet, where my X's meet. And you can do them for every single one. I've skipped one in between, just because visually I think when I'm going through this with students the first time, if it's too busy, that can be distracting. So I'm actually skipping over one. I'm also using kind of the sides here of the box to get a visual set on if it's parallel or not. Of course, that's easier when you're on the side like this. Go a little farther out. Okay, so now I've set some vertical lines. I'll end up using those verticals to create the parallels of kind of the corners where my walls meet. Okay, so here we are. Pause the video if you need to catch up, totally fine. This does take time, but make sure when you look at your grid that all of these lines on this angle are totally perfectly parallel, and they're not getting closer together on a corner and wider on one side. And then of course on the flip, that any line that runs this way is parallel. The big piece here, we're actually creating what's kind of like an illusion of depth, as opposed to like a cube that goes off in the distance perfectly. We're creating an illusion of depth here, and because it's an illusion of depth, the rules of parallel lines is absolutely critical, and anything a little off can mess up the whole look. So any line that I create or that I add on, and I'm going to add on lots more lines, any line that runs this way needs to be parallel, and any line that I add this way needs to run parallel as well. So my next piece here, I look at this example, and you can see I've shaded in a diamond. It also means that eventually I'm going to add on to that, and maybe I'll just do that right now, shading this as an example so that you can see how I would create an opening. That's shaking the table, but so there's an opening. I could actually make this room come farther down. Maybe it's like an L-shaped room by shading that in. But before I shade, I'm actually going to erase this opening. So if I wanted a room that's kind of this L-shaped room, then I'm going to erase the internal lines of this line here and this line here, so that I end up having a room like that. I'm going to do one that's kind of a similar spot. So I think I'm going to have an L-shaped room here, and I'm going to actually have them double wide. So I'm going to erase these. A smaller eraser would have been wiser. Trying to erase gently so I don't shake the table and the camera too much. So I'm going to have a skinny side here and a wider side there. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to just darken those lines a bit just so that you can see them easier. You may not want to darken them on your good copy because we know that dark outlines end up making things look flat and non-realistic. There we go. But for our practice page, I am going to just darken those lines a little bit so it's easier for you guys to see the choices I made when I created this opening. There we go. I'll make this one more perfect because I erased a little tiny touch of it. There we go. And I'm going to make that a little shorter. There we go. Okay, so now you can see, hopefully you can see this kind of cutout that I've created. Now I want to decide as an artist, do I want this to be a shallow room? And I'll see if I can find that example like this one. These are all very shallow rooms. So I'm actually deciding how much floor space compared to wall space I'm using. So this one is a particularly very short room. These are not high walls at all. And really you can see this is like one of those lava lamps that because it's such a short room, this lava lamp is actually going way up and past the wall. Okay, you can see in the perspective as well that I can see this interior wall, but I cannot see this interior wall, right? For me to see this wall, I'd have to be inside this space and looking this way. That's kind of the idea of creating this three-dimensional space. I'm going to see if I can find a deeper one. I like seeing, yeah. So here's an example here. I know the student has also added lots of details, but this is a much deeper room. Right? So you can see a bunch of stuff on this wall, and then you only, I think, just get a little hint of where someone might walk. So this is a much deeper space. Right here you've got a deeper wall. Let's see if I have an example of another deep space. Here we go. So you can see, let me find a little example. You can only see a very small amount of this. It's covered in water, but you can see that this is just a shallower area, whereas the height of this building is actually double. So they've taken this grid and doubled it, and so that's a high wall space. Again, with the stairs, they've decided they're really short little stairs compared to kind of the height of that building. So this is where you need to decide how deep you want these walls. So for this one, I'm going to make short walls. So it's a short space, and I'm really deciding it's any height that you want you can add, but when you add your walls you need to make sure that you're copying or following along these parallel lines. So to start, I'm going to create the vertical line of the interior space, and I have to be really fussy to make sure that it's parallel, or it's totally vertical, so it's parallel to my side of the box. And here is where I can add my interior walls. But now you can see in this process, you can see that this is going to be one of the interior walls here. And the length of this vertical line is determining how deep those walls will be. So maybe I'll do a really light one and I'll show you what it would look like if I wanted shallower walls. So here, this is where I'm using my grid. So I'm actually using this whole long line to see and match up that it's parallel, because I'm not actually using any markers anymore. I won't be using any markers on the side. Instead, I'm just having to eyeball it to make sure it's totally a parallel line. Okay, so here you go. Now you can see this is a wall. I'm actually might see if I can zoom in a little bit. So here you can see this is the interior wall, and this is an interior wall, and this is all the floor space, right? The length of this vertical line is actually what decides how deep those walls are going to be. I'm just going to zoom back out again. There we go. And I'm gonna, there we go. Okay, perfect. So I can show you that this is a very short wall. I'm going to erase it. You don't need to do this, but I'm going to show you what it would look like, or what I would do differently if I wanted a very tall room, or I guess I should say a deeper room. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done a longer line or a deeper line for this interior space. So now you can get a sense of what this room looks like when I've lengthened that corner or that vertical line. So here's my interior wall, the other interior wall, and now you can see that the floor space here is much smaller and the height of the wall is much larger. Then I've jumped down here and I've created a new space. Okay, so I'm starting my second interior room. You'll notice when you look at the instruction slides that I've posted is that you are required to do 7 different openings, and openings that are different layouts. So this is kind of a deep L-shaped room, and now I've kind of got this zigzagged room, or I've added some more corners. Before I jump into this one, I want to make sure I finish this, and I wanted to show you that. So the vertical line here, I'm going to see that it is, I'm going to spin this around to inches. So I've made it almost a full inch. So I know that that is going to actually come into or cross into the wall. So I'm not actually going to, you'll end up, this exterior wall is actually ending, or you can't really, or covering the bottom of this wall. So now I actually have a finished room. Then I'm going to jump back down to here, and I'm going to start, I'm going to make a small or a short room just so that you can see the difference. It's totally up to you. It might make sense for your vision if you want to have some short rooms or some deep rooms. It might make more sense for you, depending on what your vision is, to have consistency in terms of the depth. It's totally up to you. But here I am. I'm going to actually go with a super duper short wall just to show you what that looks like, or the difference that looks like. So I've done a really, really short vertical line. Then I'm creating the parallels. In both directions. That actually didn't work because I needed to move my ruler a little lower. So it actually met the corner exactly. There we go. That's better. Okay. Then I know that I can actually take a measurement. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little ticks from the inch mark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So now I'm creating a whole other wall for that same interior space, making sure that the lines I create are always perfectly parallel. And that's it. Oh, no, I can still see this interior wall as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it goes to there. Okay, there we go. So now you got the second different room. So I've got a really deep room, I have a really shallow room. In the deep wall room, I can only see a small amount of the floor space. In a shallow wall room, I can see a lot more of the floor space. So now you're getting the idea. You can see I've kind of got a zigzag wall here, and that's requiring me to make some more of those kind of cutoffs or corners. So I think we're going to pause there, take some time, do some practicing. Even on this small space or on this practice sheet, you can really actually fit a bunch of different rooms, and be creative. See if you can add a window in here that still follows those parallel line rules. Maybe you can add something into the floor. Maybe you actually cut out a hole in the floor and something gets set even deeper into this 3-dimensional space. So take time, practice around. Every time you add a line, always consider or remember that you're needing to make them parallel. If it's a line this way, like the floor line or the floor line, make sure they're always perfectly parallel to those other angled lines. If you're creating the depth of a building, maybe you want something that's popping up above this flat surface, then, or even something that's sunken in like this, make sure that those vertical lines are perfectly vertical and parallel to the exterior sides of the square. Every line that you create really does need to be parallel to something else in your sheet. All right, have fun.